Okay, we'll now introduce our Triton student, Sarah. Sarah, if you'd like to have a little conversation with Tanika.
Yes, hi. Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here. So I'll just go ahead in the questions. So I have comments too. In the movie, it was mentioned that the neighborhood of Englewood had six aldermen, and and I thought that someone that is not from the neighborhood would think that having that many people that residents can go to and ask for help would be like all good and everything will be solved. But however, it was pointed out that it was quite the opposite. So I wanted to ask you, oh yeah, if you could please elaborate how it is actually a problem.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And the reason that it's a problem is because the aldermanic wards, although Inglewood has six, um, the aldermen, their wards include other neighborhoods outside of Inglewood. So all six of those aldermen have a small portion of Inglewood, except the 16th ward, which has a nice amount. But the problem is, one, the other wards or the other neighborhoods that's included in all of the alderman wards, sometimes they have higher home ownership or stronger business corridors. So when it comes to a decision of what part of your ward are you gonna try to funnel money to, oftentimes they'll choose the business corridors or the neighborhoods outside of Greater Englewood that are established and that can immediately benefit from funding. In addition to that, just take, for example, if all of the residents of Greater Englewood wanted, which this is very real, this has been going on, wanted our main corridor, which is 63rd Street, to be restored with businesses. That 63rd Street runs through 4 wards. So that means everyone who lives ultimately in the same neighborhood, in order for them to make change, they would all have to go to different aldermen and then have to get all of those aldermen to hopefully agree to invest in this one street that goes through all of their wards. And normally that has not been the priority for the existing aldermen, for them to come together and invest in a small part of their ward for the greater good of this one neighborhood that they all have a small piece in. So it just has played out to be kind of disenfranchisement. There isn't one alderman until recently, most recently this year, that has tried to rally all of the aldermen together to really focus on investing in this neighborhood that they all have a small piece in. So it can come off as confusing to, most people would think, oh, you have more aldermen, so that means you have more people to fight for you. Well, no, because the wards include other neighborhoods that have a larger portion of any alderman's ward, and they usually get the attention. So that has left Greater Englewood to consistently, over time, over many decades, to kind of be ignored.
Wow, that really sounds complicated.
It is. There has been a positive change in 2020. Greater Englewood has one new alderman, Alderman Stephanie Coleman of the 16th Ward, and her ward actually has a lot of Englewood. And so all of the aldermen have finally come together to start to have the very conversation that I told you most of them weren't having over the past decade. So it has been a change in approach, some new blood in the system. So that has been a conversation. And then also Alderman Stephanie Coleman was just elected to be on the reparations subcommittee of the Chicago City Council. And she's sharing that position with North Side Alderman Andre Vasquez, who, funny enough, is my friend from Lane Tech High School. So did not surprise me that he would eventually become alderman and be on the reparations subcommittee. So all of those things together is looking promising for Inglewood to finally get some attention around the disinvestment that has occurred over the past several decades.
Wow, I'm glad to hear everything is coming together. There was also a word that stood out to me and that you mentioned a little bit of it in your answer. That was disinvestment. And I wanted to ask if you could please also elaborate when Chicago's history did the trajectory of disinvestment started, and if you could also comment on its continued impact on your neighborhood today.
Yes, another great question. I'm glad that Folded Map prompted you to even ask those questions. I always wanted Folded Map to kind of be an entree into people starting to think about this, and your questions are so heartwarming because that's the exact issue. So with Greater Inglewood, just like most predominantly Black neighborhoods in Chicago, but really Greater Inglewood and the West Side neighborhoods of Lawndale and North Lawndale, as well as Garfield Park, but really Lawndale. The trauma that occurred in both of those neighborhoods that kind of started the downward trajectory of disinvestment was in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, specifically the 50s and 60s. So redlining, that's where the government actually graded neighborhoods according to race, basically saying that if a neighborhood had predominantly Black people, they would give it a grade of a D or F. And this is the grading system that banks actually used. And so banks use this, these HOLC, H-O-L-C maps to determine if they were going to approve loans in these neighborhoods, home loans, business loans, anything like that. And so that meant that not only were Black people pushed into certain neighborhoods because of segregation, but it was supported and federally backed by these red line maps. And so banks did not approve mortgages or business loans to those neighborhoods. And that started what would eventually lead to an opportunity for greedy people to take advantage of Black families who were trying to still find ways to become a homeowner. So there was several greedy people that historically people referred to as blockbusters, basically loan sharks, who took advantage of this vulnerable population of Black people who still were trying to get homes, even though they couldn't get approved for a mortgage from a bank. And they would sell homes to Black families under a tool called land sale contracts. And that is a very common tool. It's even still used today, but it's basically like a rent to own process where you pay your rent and you eventually own this home, but you don't earn equity. And equity is what determines like the whole point of purchasing a home. So a lot of these Black families unknowingly purchased their home on land sale contracts. They were told it was an actual mortgage. And the reason that they were lied to is because the loan sharks were able to sell them homes at a higher market rate. And if they were to miss a payment, they would evict them, or they would just, evict them and sell it to another family, lying to them. So Greater Inglewood has a huge number of homes, just like the West Side neighborhood of Lawndale, that were sold on these land sale contracts. So that means that, I'll give an example. Today, the home ownership of Greater Inglewood is at 25%. In the 50s and 60s, if all of those Black families who thought they had mortgages actually had mortgages, the home ownership rate would probably be like 70% now, but they didn't. And the residents of the West Side community of Lawndale came together and, you know, took it to court. They had help of lawyers who specialized in this. And so it made that practice illegal to use land sale contracts in this specific way, but the damage had been done. The damage of these neighborhoods not having a high home ownership. And high home ownership really truly determines the economic value of a neighborhood. Most businesses don't want to put their business in a neighborhood that doesn't have high home ownership, has a lot of renters. And then in addition to segregation in the 50s and 60s, as a result, city services weren't deployed to these neighborhoods, like trash pickup, garbage cans, all of those things. So that changed how the neighborhood looked. And so as people started getting evicted, city services weren't being deployed, no new businesses were being started. That also trickled down to eventually the schools being underfunded, because your property taxes go directly to schools. And if you have neighborhoods with low home ownership, their schools don't have the opportunity to get quality investment. So all of those things over the course of 40 years, 50 years, lands neighborhood like Greater Englewood in a position where they don't have much economic value and they don't have a strong business corridor. And all of those things stemmed from 50 years ago because of racist housing policies. And so when people talk about what systemic racism is, this is it. Englewood wouldn't be the neighborhood that it is now had racism and segregation didn't exist. Long answer. Oh my gosh. So sorry.
It's fine. That's what we're looking for. Wow, that's amazing how one little thing can go to a bigger problem.
Now, yeah, which ultimately, you know, if people have that understanding, and it took me getting older to connect it to my life, that is the primary reason I went to school on Chicago's North Side, because these schools in my neighborhood weren't of a quality that my mom wanted for me. And that was the case for a lot of Black teenagers in the 80s and 90s, that we went to school outside of our neighborhood because of that.
Yeah. Yeah. So one last question is, how has Folded Map Project impacted your community in bringing awareness to the inequities that we were talking about? And have you witnessed any positive change throughout the years?
Yes. So since 2018, a lot has happened. But most importantly, which, you know, I hope people don't minimize the importance of it, but is, you know, conversations like this. The project has allowed me to connect with people who I wouldn't have otherwise to talk about this issue. And it really is that simple. The more people know, the more they can question, just like you did, and the more they can challenge people when they hear things that are stereotypical or racist. A lot of people think that Greater Englewood is just a neighborhood of criminals and victims of gun violence, and that isn't the case. And also people don't even understand how the neighborhood got this way. So the more people learn about it, the more people I talk to about it, the more information they can have to have more challenging conversations with people who say negative things. So that definitely has been the greatest impact of Folded Map. And then also, just like this, educators being able to use it to teach their students what systemic racism is and how it's still with us today, even though none of us living right now created these policies or were part of that. We're all living in it, not just the people who are in communities that are negatively impacted,